I remember being 16 and thinking I had it all figured out. The truth? I had no clue what I was doing. My life back then was a mess, though I didn't see it that way. On Friday nights, my friends and I would hit up these wild parties, the kind where the music was so loud it rattled the windows, and the air reeked of cigarettes and cheap booze. I'd grab whatever drinks someone handed me, laughing like nothing else in the world mattered. Sometimes, I'd even try things I knew I shouldn't, things I told myself were no big deal. One night, I remember stumbling out of a house party, completely wasted. My friends were cheering, cracking jokes, acting like life was just one big game, and in that moment, I felt invincible. But deep down, buried under all that noise, I felt empty. I just didn't want to admit it. While I was out there living recklessly, my mom was at home. Every single time I came stumbling in at 2 or 3 in the morning, the light in the living room would still be on. She'd be sitting in her chair pretending to read a book, but I knew she was waiting for me. She'd always ask the same thing. "How was your night, Ethan?" I never gave her much of an answer. "It was fine," I'd say, brushing past her to my room. Most nights I didn't even look her in the eye. But one night, I remember her voice stopping me. "Ethan," she said softly, "can we talk for a minute?" I turned around, frustrated. "Mom, it's late. I'm tired. Can we do this some other time?" Her face fell, but she nodded and said, "Okay, good night, sweetheart." I didn't think much of it then, but looking back, I wonder how many nights she sat there, waiting, just waiting for me to let her in. At the time, I told myself she didn't get it. She didn't understand what it was like to be me. But now I realize she understood more than I ever gave her credit for. My mom, Claire, was the kind of woman who never gave up on anyone, especially me. Looking back, I don't know how she managed to hold on to so much hope. She worked harder than anyone I've ever known. During the day, she cleaned offices downtown, and at night, she waited tables at a local diner. Her hands were always rough from scrubbing and cleaning, but she never complained. She used to tell me, "I'll do whatever it takes to give you a better life, Ethan." At the time, those words went in one ear and out the other. I remember one night when I was about 10 years old. She had just come home from her second job, her uniform smelling like grease and coffee. I was sitting at the kitchen table, struggling with my math homework. She put her bag down, tied her hair back, and sat beside me, even though I could see how exhausted she was. "Let's figure this out together," she said, her voice soft but steady. She stayed up with me for hours that night, helping me solve every single problem. I didn't realize it then, but moments like that were her way of telling me she'd always be there, no matter what. But by the time I hit my teenage years, I'd stopped noticing those little things. I was too caught up in my own world. My friends, the parties, the need to fit in. I thought I was too cool for her. There was this one time I stole $20 from her purse to buy some alcohol for a party. She found out, of course. Moms always do. Instead of yelling or punishing me, she just looked at me with those tired eyes and said, "If you needed money, Ethan, you could have asked me. I would have found a way to get it for you." Her words didn't make me feel relieved. They made me feel worse. But instead of apologizing, I brushed it off and avoided her for the next few days. I didn't want to face how much I was letting her down. And still, she never gave up on me. Whenever people asked about me, she'd smile and say, "Oh, Ethan's a good boy. He's just going through a phase." She defended me, even when I didn't deserve it. I think what breaks my heart the most now is remembering how she used to pray for me every single night. I'd catch her sometimes, sitting on the edge of her bed with her hands clasped together, whispering words I couldn't hear. Once, I heard her say my name. She prayed for me to find my way, to stay safe, to be happy. At the time, I rolled my eyes. I thought, what's the point? But now I'd give anything to hear her say one more prayer for me. The breaking point came one cold November night. I had just turned 18, and by then, I was completely out of control. I skipped school more often than I showed up, spent most nights drunk or high, and barely spoke to my mom anymore. That night, I had gotten into a fight with a group of guys at a party. It was stupid, over something as meaningless as who was standing where. Someone shoved me, and before I knew it, fists were flying. By the time I stumbled home, my face was swollen, my knuckles bloody, and my shirt torn. When I opened the door, the living room light was on, just like always. And there she was, sitting in her chair, waiting for me. Her face looked pale, and there were dark circles under her eyes. "Ethan," she said softly, standing up, "what happened to you?" I was so angry, so ashamed of myself, that I snapped. "Why do you even care?" I yelled. "You're always sitting there, pretending everything's fine. Newsflash, Mom, it's not. I don't need your stupid questions or your stupid prayers. Just leave me alone." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't yell back. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she took a step toward me and said, "Ethan, I care because I love you. You're my son, and no matter what you've done, I'll always love you." That should have made me stop. It should have broken through the wall I'd built around myself. But instead, I laughed bitterly and said, "Well, maybe you shouldn't. Maybe you should stop wasting your time on someone like me." Her face crumpled like I'd just ripped her heart out. She didn't say anything for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Do you really think that's possible? That I could ever stop loving you?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just stormed off to my room, slamming the door behind me. That night, I heard her crying. It wasn't the quiet, muffled kind of crying I was used to hearing from her bedroom. This time, it was loud, raw, and heartbreaking. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Guilt. But I didn't do anything about it. I told myself she'd get over it, just like she always did. I'd apologize eventually, when the time felt right. Only, I didn't know I was running out of time. Years went by, and life kept moving. After barely scraping through school, I packed my bags and left, determined to chase my dreams. I told myself I needed freedom, space to grow, and a chance to prove I could stand on my own 2 feet. Mom, as always, supported me. "Go and be great, Ethan," she said the day I left, hugging me tightly. But she didn't let go until I did. I didn't look back as I walked away. I moved overseas for a new job, chasing opportunities and building a life. At first, I called her every week. Then, as months passed, those calls became less frequent. "I'll call her next week," I'd tell myself, distracted by deadlines, friends, and the illusion of being too busy. She still sent me emails, little updates about life back home, pictures of her garden, and even the occasional recipe she thought I might like. I always meant to respond, but somehow, there was never enough time. Then, one day, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. It was one of Mom's neighbors. "Ethan," she said, her voice trembling, "I hate to tell you this, but your mom collapsed at work today. She's in critical condition." The world seemed to tilt beneath me. "What happened?" I asked, my voice cracking. "They think it was her heart. She's been under so much stress lately," the neighbor explained. "The doctors are doing what they can. But, Ethan, you should come home." I hung up and immediately booked the first flight home. But there was a layover. Hours stretched into eternity as I sat in the airport, staring at the departure board, willing time to move faster. Halfway through the wait, my phone buzzed. It was another call from the same number. My heart dropped as I answered. "Ethan," the neighbor said softly, and then she paused. That pause felt like it lasted forever. "I'm so sorry," she finally whispered. "Your mom, she passed away a few minutes ago." The words hit me like a freight train. My chest felt hollow, and I couldn't breathe. I was thousands of miles away, sitting in a sterile airport terminal, while the one person who had loved me unconditionally slipped away without me there. I boarded the plane, numb and broken, replaying every moment I'd wasted in my head. Every missed phone call, every unanswered email, every excuse I'd made not to visit. I thought I'd have more time. When I finally walked into the house I'd grown up in, it was silent. Her presence was everywhere. In the photos on the walls, in the scent of her favorite candle, in the cozy chair by the window where she used to sit and wait for me to call. On the kitchen table was a small envelope with my name on it. Inside was a note written in her neat handwriting. "No matter where you are, Ethan, I'll always be proud of you. Love, Mom." I sank into a chair, holding the note in shaking hands, and broke down completely. I'd been so caught up in my own life that I never stopped to appreciate hers. I thought I had all the time in the world to say thank you, to say I love you, to say I'm sorry. But I didn't. It was too late. After the funeral, I went through her things, trying to piece together the parts of her life I had ignored. I found her journal. The entries were simple, everyday thoughts. How her garden was doing, how proud she was when I got my first promotion, how she'd cried happy tears after I sent her a photo of my new apartment. But then I came across a page that stopped me cold. It was dated just a few months before she passed. "Ethan hasn't called in weeks. I know he's busy, but I hope he knows I'm always here for him. I just want to hear his voice." Her words were so full of love, even in her loneliness. I decided to honor her the only way I knew how, by becoming the man she always believed I could be. I started small, reaching out to friends and family, apologizing for the times I'd been distant. I joined a volunteer group to help kids struggling with addiction, sharing my story in the hope that they wouldn't make the same mistakes I did. But more than that, I changed how I lived. I stopped taking people for granted. I started valuing moments over milestones, love over success. Because if Mom taught me anything, it's that life is too short to let the important things slip away. To all of you watching this now, if you're lucky enough to still have your parents, don't wait to tell them how much they mean to you. Don't wait for the right time to pick up the phone or visit. There's no such thing as the perfect moment. There's only now. Because one day, you'll wake up and realize that time doesn't wait for anyone. And when it's too late, all the words you wanted to say will echo in your heart, unanswered. So, please, call your mom. Call your dad. Hug your family. Say, thank you. Say, I love you. Life isn't about chasing after big dreams or proving how independent you are. It's about the people who make those dreams worth chasing. It's about the love that carries you, even when you don't realize it. My mom didn't get to hear me say this, but maybe your loved ones still can. Thank you for believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. I love you, and I always will.